What's up, YouTube? We only have 12 days, that's not even 2 weeks left, until VCT Ascension Pacific happening over in Jakarta, and we still have 9 teams that we need to cover before that, so we got to get a move on. So without further ado, let's jump right into the next team that we want to take a look at, actually going to be the opponents of Full Sense, which we covered in the last video. It's going to be none other than Oblivion Force. Now, you're probably wondering, who in the world is Oblivion Force? It's a bit of a catchy name, but it definitely is not a name you've been hearing around, of the VCT scene for a long time, and that's because they're not actually a pro organization, but we'll get more into that in just a little bit. Oblivion Force is the team that's going to be representing the Taiwan-Hong Kong sub-region coming into VCT Ascension Pacific. Now, last year, One Team Esports represented this area in VCT Ascension back in Bangkok. This time, it's going to be a new team. So let's get familiar with the names on the roster first. A lot of you are probably looking at this page and reeling a little bit just because there's more than 5 faces on there. But again, we'll get to that in just a bit. But let's just go through the entire spectrum here. First off, you got Gigi Hui, who's going to be actually the 6th man on the bench, or at least that's what it seems like so far. But Gigi Hui, Q, Chime, and Coconut were all part of the original roster in Stage 1 as well. So those 4 are kind of the core that carried on into Stage 2. Then they made some roster changes, and Uta and Ria are coming in as 2 additional players for this full roster in Stage 2, which helped carry them into Ascension. So Gigi Hui, moving on into the 6th man role on the bench, used to be the main duelist, it seems, but did play 1 single game of Chamber, of all things, in Stage 2. Then you have Q, who's going to be the primary controller. As you can tell, only playing controllers, the most typical ones in the current meta as well, so that's no big surprise. But then things get a little wonky. Yes, Chime is playing, mostly just initiator, so, okay, you know what, actually, up to that point, we'll say, all right, it's fine for the most part. But then you have Coconut, who is playing Cypher, Gecko, Viper? So first of all, 3 different roles like in-game, right? So you got Sentinel, you got Initiator, then you've got Controller. But yeah, you could argue like, all right, Viper's a bit of a Sentinel, a lot of lurks, especially with the Cypher, so that makes sense. But then you've got the Gecko, who isn't exactly a lurker. That's a lot of info play, that's you've got flashes, you've got initiation. Okay, interesting. And then we get to Uta, whose most played agent so far is actually the Jet, but then he's also playing the Cypher, and a little bit of the Yeoman, and a little bit of the Brim towards the end, and it gets a little wonky. And then we get back to a little bit of normalcy with Ria, or, riyabtw, who is going to be now the new primary duelist. One of the reasons things got a little wonky here with the roles for this team is because bringing in the 2 additional players, Uta and Ria, really kind of threw a wrench in the original roles that they had. So a lot of these players kind of had to start flexing around just per map. Obviously, I don't know exactly how much time they had to transition all of this, but from Stage 1 to Stage 2, it's not like there was that much time to begin with. So for instance, like Coconut used to be the main Sentinel, but now he's flexing, and obviously, maybe they really wanted things like the Gecko, you wanted things like the double controller with the Viper. Okay, it all makes sense. But the other thing we have to remember, other than the roster change, is that Taiwan-Hong Kong also ended their split 2 very early. They actually ended before Abyss was even in the map pool. They were still playing split in the grand finals. And split was a very big part of this team. So that also should give us a little bit of notice. Like, for instance, one of the reasons Uta's playing so much Jet is that if they're playing the double duelist, it's going to be him on the Jet and Ria on the Raze, and they were doing that on Split. So there's a lot of things to consider here that makes things a little wonky, right? We have to go a little bit into the time capsule to figure out exactly how this team of Oblivion Force was playing throughout the year. So let's talk about what that path looks like. So obviously it ended a lot earlier than some of the other regions, but on top of that, we have to remember that Taiwan-Hong Kong had a pure circuit point system, right? So for instance, Thailand had a bit of a point system, but into a final qualifier, whereas Taiwan-Hong Kong was just, okay, there's 2 splits, there's circuit points, whoever has the most moves on. Now, funny enough, Oblivion Force was actually the most dominant team if you look at the whole year. They actually were undefeated in the group stage in the round robin of both splits. Imagine that, 14-0 in the round robins across both splits. An insane record, no doubt. But then you take a look at the playoffs of Split 1, and they just could not get over the hump of the reigning champions, we'll call them, in the region of One Team Esports. They actually lose to them in the upper finals, and then they try to make a run back, but the grand finals, they still can't get over them. And so far, by that point, it looks like, okay, One Team Esports probably likely to continue on as the favorites here for this region, right? They represented them last year. Some of those players still remain coming back with that experience. Their group stage dominance is great, but it's just not enough. Then we take a look at Split 2. Oblivion Force comes out swinging again. They go 7-0 again. They take down One Team Esports in the group stage in the round robin again. And it's like, okay, I mean, we've seen this before. We'll see how this pans out. And then this time, they fall down to the lower bracket before they can even reach One Team Esports. So they make it all the way. This time, they're able to get their revenge in the grand finals where it matters most, because they barely tie. They just now tie the circum points with One Team Esports by beating them in the grand finals of Split 2. These two teams took first and second place in reverse last split in Split 1, and then in Split 2 and flips. So now they're tied at 140 points each, but Oblivion Force, of course, winning Split 2 gives them that edge and secures them that ticket to VCT Ascension Pacific. Kind of a crazy story, because here's the other thing. Oblivion Force is, technically speaking, an amateur team. This is not a pro organization. This is a bunch of players that got together for another shot. I mean, this is the Ascension dream, and they are trying to make it happen. Now, this isn't to say that the players are inexperienced. As you probably noticed when we were looking at the roster pictures earlier, some of them have the official photos with jerseys of Chinese teams, and a lot of them, it's because they were playing on some of these Chinese teams last year when a lot of Chinese teams were just kind of picking up whatever players they could, whether it was from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, to kind of fill out rosters and test the waters when the official first couple acts were going on before, the final tournaments and the final Ascension tournament to get into VCT China. So we had a couple players actually playing together on teams like LGD Gaming. Uta was playing on NIP. So there was a lot of experience already for a lot of these players. But the fact of the matter is One Team Esports continuing under that banner. They're trying to come through. They're trying to make it happen. It's funny because you're watching them play on One Team Esports. They're playing in their team house. They're all together, and you look at the cameras of Oblivion Force, and we're going back in time. They're playing online. They're all in their own bedrooms. You actually see, I think, one of their parents walk into the camera like during the winners interview, like in the background. It's very raw. It's very real. But you gotta imagine that makes it just all the sweeter here for these players. So let's talk about the key players then. For me, it's got to be Uta and Ria. I mean, these were some monster pickups for this team. Both of them are so good, and now it does seem like Uta is mostly going to start playing more of that Sentinel role, and maybe the double smoke whenever needed with things like the Brimstone, giving him a little bit more freedom of a little bit more lurking, right? Maybe you play lineups, maybe you're playing anchor on the other side, things like that. Whereas Ria is obviously now fixed in as the primary duelist, and they do a great job on opposite ends of the team. Ria, very explosive entries when needed. He carries certain rounds with multi-kills on his own. Now, there are setups, like I'm not saying he's left on his own and he's just moving ahead of his team, but even if there is a good flash, like you have to still secure all those multi-kills. You still have to win some of these rounds. And then he'll sometimes just get aces like these and just turn the round on its head and kind of help secure the victory. So you got Ria doing that up the front, and then you got Uta, who's still just as reliable in his own individual skill level to really take on a lot of these opponents that they had in Taiwan, Hong Kong. And that really, I think, makes things perhaps a bit easier and simpler and more straightforward for the rest of the team, despite all these role shuffles. So the real focus here is that, especially on the attack, you're kind of working to just set up Ria step by step. They play a lot of step-by-step entry, right? Like clearing close corners, and then Ria goes in, team's there to trade, then you clear, and then you kind of clear out the initial corners of a site, you go in, you're ready to trade, and then you kind of flood in the rest of the site. We're not really seeing as much regular intervals of full site crazy executes with all the utility. It's much more about, hey, let's just make sure Ria's not getting picked off, right, in some weird corner and getting blindsided, and then we should be able to win. A lot of confidence plays as well. But my eyes are on these two guys, and this isn't to take away from any of the rest, obviously, because the rest are the core of this roster, but I just think that the firepower that these two bring have really helped push them over that finish line. I will say I'm going to give Gigi Hui a shout because, I mean, this is that classic meme of, gets benched, comes back in, plays one map of Chamber, helps win the lower finals to put them into the grand finals against One Team Esports, leaves, refuses to elaborate. He plays one map, and it's on Chamber. Dude used to be the primary duelist. He comes in, plays one map on Chamber, gets the victory, and he's back on the bench just chilling. Like, I mean, who knows how they're going to bring him back in? I mean, especially with Abyss now in the map pool, splits out. They could do some interesting things. So we'll have to wait and see. So this next part is where we're going to have to take things with a grain of salt because, I mean, remember when I said that they were the most dominant team and they went 14-0 across 2 group stages, 2 round robins? Well, yeah, when things like that happen, this is what your win rates look like. You're pretty much never losing on 4 of these maps. In fact, 5, because Split was actually the most dominant map. They went 11-0 in Split 2. 11-0 in Split 2. I mean, like, I don't know why they were allowed to play Split after, like, I don't know, the 6th or 7th time. Like, that is an insane statistic. But yeah, I mean, it just seems like the other teams just couldn't figure out where to fight them. I mean, when you have 4 maps that were at 100% win rate, and then you have Bind at 80%. Now, I will say, for instance, like you watch their Haven game, even against One Team Esports in the grand finals, which is the one map that they lost, and you can see why. So there are reasons. There are reasons on the maps that they did lose why they're losing them. It is quite apparent, right? You just don't see as much organization. Their Haven is a bit more all in. It's a bit more of a, hey, well, we did A, so let's do B, and we're going to commit to that. And if it doesn't work, like, it's a bit more rock, paper, scissors. There's not as much, kind of step-by-step, patient, macro play, things like that. So maybe it's just, obviously, again, they finished their season in July, so there's been a lot of time. Maybe they brushed that up, and now even those maps are going to be good. It's very hard to read. So these stats are kind of all over the window. But I will say, having a 21% attack win rate on Haven across 2 games played, like, that is pretty bad. So that's something that you definitely should look to target. Like, you should definitely be, I'm sure it's been a long time, but that's an abysmally low number on a map that's supposed to have a bit of an advantage with the 3 sites on the attacking side. So there's some things to glean from here. But like the 100% win rates, I mean, there's not too much to, I guess Lotus, I mean, it's 5-0 now, so yeah, I don't think you really want to pick into that. Obviously it's nothing like their Split, which was 11-0, but 5-0 is still a pretty strong record. But I would also say that there's a good chance that their Lotus hasn't evolved much, because that's their comfort pick. Like, that's their biggest comfort pick. So that's something that you could try to target as well. And that's something that they'll have to be aware of. To give a little bit of benefit of the doubt for this team, though, is that's the map that they played the Chamber on in the lower finals, right? Like, that's do or die match. That's a do or die best of 5. And you decide, yo, we're bringing out the Chamber. We're playing it once, planting a little bit of seed of doubt for the next day. And then we just go back. Chamber's gone. So obviously they feel comfortable enough to switch things up just a bit. As we wrap things up here for Oblivion Force, I will also say that I see some very, very minuscule changes that they make based on their opponent. I mean, again, I'm not going to give them all the credit and say, like, I know exactly what they're thinking and say that it's specifically just because of comps. I mean, it's probably a combination of the enemy team composition, like the agent composition, the enemy team players, and the tendencies, because obviously they're very familiar with all these teams, especially by the end of Split 2. So it's a combination of that, but it's things like, okay, you're playing against One Team Esports on Bind, for instance. One Team Esports is playing no Viper. They're playing the Omen Brimstone, and you're taking a look at that and you're saying, okay, like, this team isn't going to be lurking as hard, so we don't need to fish for info as much despite having a double initiator with the Sky and the Gecko. So we actually wait to make sure we delay their attack, because that's where they have a bit of an edge with things like the Paranoia and the extra smokes and the extra movement with the Omen. So there are these small micro adjustments that they're making based on the opponent's compositions. Like, they do seem to showcase that they're aware of needing an understanding of strengths and weaknesses of team comps, enemy tendencies, the win conditions, and all of that. But again, the reason I keep hesitating, like, I want to actually get excited about this team. I do, and I'm going to get excited enough to say that they've definitely caught my attention as a dark horse team this Ascension. But with tournaments like these, it's always tough to say how much of this is while being pressured and how much of this is, okay, you're just better than the other teams in your own region. That part, we're just not sure. And if I had watched every single match, I could probably make a better educated guess, like of every other team as well. But I haven't watched all of their matches, and I definitely haven't watched the matches of all the other teams in this region. So I hesitate to get a little bit too hyped for this team. But what I saw was, I mean, the fact that, okay, they know their strengths. They're working around Rhea. They're working to set him up. They're kind of going step-by-step approaches. But when their opponents are a bit weaker or their team composition can't really deal with things as much, they do go in for deeper executes on the attack. Like I said, on defense, sometimes they'll actually fish for information. They'll do things like push out, eliminate a part of the map, and just take harder macro control. And then other times they say, listen, it doesn't matter if we have control or not, because all we need to care about is we need to waste their time moving around, and then they go for one single execute. That's what their composition relies on. We delay that, we win, right? Obviously, and then you're confident you're winning the firefights. So given that they have an understanding like that, they could do some damage. I mean, they could do some damage, because those are the thought processes that allow you to adapt a bit quicker in game. So that's going to be it for Oblivion Force. A bit of an exciting team to look out for, even if you're not that familiar with them. So, if you're just kind of thinking, well, I kind of want an exciting underdog, maybe a dark horse story, I would say this one's worth looking at. I would say Oblivion Force is a team to keep your eyes on. But let me know down in the comments below. I mean, what else do you know? Maybe you know something more about this team. I'd love to hear it. Or if you're just looking for it, if this has excited you about this team's prospects, do let me know, because they definitely caught my attention. But that's it for now. In the next video, we're going to be taking a look at the two other teams playing against each other in the very first round of Ascension Pacific. It's going to be none other than Revenant Esports of South Asia and Prisa Gaming of Korea. We'll see you then.